Good morning. It's Friday the 19th of March and we're really glad you can join us. And over the next week we'll be coming to a point where it's a year ago that we went into the first lockdown, and there'll be lots to think over. So much has happened over this last year, and then some things we'll want to thank God for, and especially pray for those who've lost loved ones and lost jobs, and those who've over the years suffered from the strain of mental health. So there's lots to think about, lots to pray for.
And the Church of England is inviting people to mark the 23rd of March as a day of reflection. And Sarah said to use that day to pray, particularly for those who are on our minds and hearts at this time. Before I forget, we also want to say this morning to one of our church members in this diocese, to Nora Blades, who is a member of St Luke's Shire Oaks, which, for those who don't know the county so well, is just on the edge of Worksop. And Nora is 105 today. How about that? Incredible. So congratulations to Nora and her family celebrating today. That's an amazing milestone. That means Nora was born on this day in 1916, which is just extraordinary, all the life and events that she's lived through. So happy birthday to Nora. We're coming this morning to Psalm 78, and in fact very appropriately as we're thinking about remembering this coming week and looking back on the past year. Psalm 78 is a psalm where the people of God are looking back on their story of faith, their journey of faith, and it's not an altogether flattering picture of their journey. It goes from the time that they are brought by God out of Egypt through the wilderness years, right up to that point when God chooses David to be king. But you get a real sense that this history, this story, is a broken story. It speaks about the people of God turning their back on him and then coming back again, and God's judgment, but most of all, God's extraordinary grace that's sort of written through the entire story. But there's this pattern, almost like a cycle that they can't get out of, that is marking their history.
And at times it's quite exhausting. It's quite a long psalm reading through this, and we felt wondered repeating the cycle. How's that repeated cycle going to be broken? And for Christians, there's a hint in the final verses with the promise of another king in the family line of David. So, but it is quite long.
Yeah. But as you say, there is a sense that this is going to this cycle, which of course is only too familiar to all of us in different ways. And you think, why did I do that again, or why did I go back to that place again, or wander off the path? But what we see in this is not only God's grace, but a looking forward to how God is going to meet that need through Jesus. So we're not going to read the whole psalm. We're going to read the opening 8 verses, and then we're going to move right through to the end in the last 3 verses. So Psalm 78. My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, things we've heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. They would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him.
And then moving to verse 70. He chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people, Jacob, of Israel, his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hands he led them.
What I love about this psalm is the way that it reminds us simply that we don't have to polish up our story. God as we bring our story to him, as we tell our story of life, and particularly our story of faith. We share that with others. It hasn't got to be polished up. It's not about making ourselves look good. It's about pointing to the goodness of God and the grace of God, which is why this was a song that the people of God sang then and sing today, because it reminds us of God's faithfulness in every situation, even when we turn our back on him. And the psalm urges us to pass this on to our children and our grandchildren, the importance of remembering and not forgetting what God has done.
And as we were reading this psalm and thinking about passing on the story of our faith and the goodness of God in Jesus, it reminded us of a news story in the past week, which you may have seen. And it was about a rare songbird found mainly in Australia. It was called the Regent Honeyeater, which scientists say has become so threatened that it started to lose its song. And it's become so endangered that there's a bird sanctuary in Canberra where they're trying to teach the honeyeater the song of their wild relatives. And the birds, when they're young, they learn their song from the older birds, and they repeat it over, and it's a sort of passed on from the older generation. But because the problem is that there's so few older birds left in the wild, the younger ones are not hearing it, so they're learning the song and they're forgetting the song.
And saying they're learning the song of other birds instead, aren't they?
Other birds, so they're forgetting their own song and picking up the song of other birds. So they're trying in this sanctuary, they're trying to teach them the song of their original song, which is wonderful.
And it was quite a moving story, wasn't it? But then I think we were reminded of that story when we were reading through this last night, and just think about looking over the past year and actually thinking about the early start, the days when we were out in the garden in the spring of last year. The bird song was incredible, wasn't it? We weren't able to be outside this morning. It's a little bit wet here. But just thinking about the importance of learning to pass on the story, to pass on the song that God has given us to express the story of faith, to express the story of God's love, and pointing to his goodness, and how with that illustration of the honeyeater, wasn't it? How easily we can lose that song, and that we have a part to play. It doesn't matter how old or young we are, we can help to keep that song alive. And a song that points people to Jesus, points people to the source of God's presence in the midst of every experience of life. And I wonder whether coming out of this, and as we go on emerging out of this pandemic, whether there will be opportunities for us to sing the song of our faith afresh for new generations, and to find new ways to do that, as well as some of the old ways that have marked our life as God's people and as his church.
I love that image of us singing the song, and those of the generation will pick it up. It's a natural thing. It comes from us naturally. It's beautiful image.
So that leads us to a song. We ought to finish with a song today.
So we're closing today with a song which been a favourite of ours over this last year, and maybe for some of you too. And once again, Neil and Joanne with George are going to sing this as a prayer for us. And as God's church, let's pray that we pass this wonderful truths on to so many people in these coming days. So it's lovely. Thank you
again to Neil and Joanne and George for leading us. And whatever you're doing over this weekend and through the week to come, may you know God's blessing.
Your mercy never fails me. In all my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. so close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. See, it's good, 'cause all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, yes, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. All my life, 'cause all my life you have been faithful. Yes, all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, yes, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.